Hello and welcome back to my channel. So this week I wanted to do a little bit of a talk and I'm going to call it How to Hire an Illustrator. And perhaps I should also add to that when to hire an illustrator. As illustrators, we get regular emails from emerging authors who are keen to have us illustrate their work so that they can go and get it published. But this is not quite how the children's book publishing industry works. And so this is just going to be a little bit about how to hire an illustrator. The aim of this is just to give you guys a bit of a guide as to what's required in the children's book industry, which is the industry I tend to work in. I do have notes, so if I keep looking down, that's why, because otherwise I'll forget things. So first up, if you want your manuscript to be published, and I'm talking about the big publishing houses, if you want Penguin Random House to pick up your manuscript, do not go and ask for an illustrator before you submit it. So those publishing houses tend to choose their own illustrators. In fact, what happens is, first of all of them have different submission processes. So you need to visit their websites and find out if they're even accepting unsolicited manuscripts, if they're even accepting children's picture books, because they don't always do. And then what the process is to submit your manuscript to them. This ends up on a great pile, if you like, of all these stories. And someone gets to sort through them and they choose the ones that they think, these ones have promise. They then go off to, and there's not, I believe there's not too many, they then go off to a panel, an acquisitions panel, and out of that meeting, they'll then choose the one or two, or however many they're going to be publishing at that time, that are then going to proceed further. Now, once all of that has happened, then they choose their own illustrators, and they normally have a selection of illustrators that they work with regularly. They know that their work is on trend and that it sells really well, and probably, usually those illustrators as well already have what you call an illustrator platform. So they've already got a lot of following behind them, which does help when it comes to sales of the book. So if you do want to get your book published that way, don't go and contact illustrators and ask them if they could illustrate your book before you submit it. That is not how it works, and publishers will not appreciate it. If, however, you're wanting to self-publish your work, and by the way, self-publishing, it sometimes gets advertised as being the cheap and easy way out. It's not. Self-publishing is hard work. If you're really going to try and sell all those books and make back that money that you've invested into it, it's hard work. So really think about what process you're wanting to go through to get your book out there. But if you are going to self-publish, then yes, you will choose your own illustrator. So in this case, there's a few things that you need to remember when you go and contact an illustrator. So the first thing is that finding an illustrator and working with an illustrator is about developing a partnership. It's about the author and the illustrator coming together and bringing this thing to life and making it fantastic. If you get a great partnership, you're going to have a great product at the end. So it's often best to allow the professional illustrator a fair amount of free rein, as this will bring something new to the table, something that you might not have thought of. That's their job. So think about that. The second thing is that developing a great children's book does mean investing. It means investing a lot of time, and it means investing a lot of money. Illustrators are professionals and they need to be paid fairly for their work. Don't ever ask them to work for free. The Australian Society of Authors have actually got a sort of a rates of pay, and I'll link that down in the comments section. So if you're wanting to get a bit of an idea for how much children's book illustration or any kind of illustration costs, then go and have a look at that, and you'll get a bit of an idea for how much these things actually do cost. And it's because there is a lot of time that goes into developing really great illustrations, as well as all the other stuff. Illustrators need to take care of their own superannuation, leave. We still need to pay all our bills. We have to pay for software and upkeep of our software and our equipment that we use for illustration. If you've got an illustration that uses traditional methods, they've got to go and buy all the paper and the pens and the pencils, the paints, whatever else it is that they use. So there is a lot more that goes into it than just sitting down and doing a drawing. And, you know, as I said, illustrators are professionals. It is a professional industry. It is a proper job, even though some people find that hard to believe. So they need to be paid fairly for it. Unfortunately, in Australia, many illustrators are underpaid for their work. And this is something that, you know what, it needs to stop. It means that, as a result, a lot of illustrators have to run several jobs at once, or they might even be working a job part-time or full-time and then illustrating on the side just to try and make ends meet. It's a bit sad. I hope it changes. We're trying to make it change. It can mean that the product they produce is not as great as if they had just had the time and without the stress of worrying about everything else, worrying about if they're going to be able to put food on the table. If they've just been able to sit down and make an awesome illustration, your product is going to be so much better. Speaking of time, the third thing is that creating illustrations that will really bring your story to life, you know, that's going to connect to the readers, that will also be on trend, because it does matter. You know, all of this takes time. A professional illustrator takes many things into account when they're creating your illustrations. So everything from composition, character design, they're also thinking about whether those characters are going to connect with the reader, but they also need to take into consideration things such as the pace of the story and page turns. What's going to get them to keep turning that page, but also what's going to get them to come back and reread the story and look at the pictures and get something more out of the story every time they read it. As well as this, when the book is on the shelf, what's going to make someone pick that one up and purchase that one over the myriad of other books that are there? There's a lot that the illustrator has to take into account, and all of this takes time. Often the first drawing that an illustrator does is certainly not going to be the finished drawing. There's many that happen in order to get it right. So the third step is to allow the illustrator to have the time they need to produce the best product. Okay, so taking all those things into consideration, what is the process for getting an illustrator, for hiring an illustrator? How do you hire an illustrator? Well, first of all, when you contact them, just a little bit of a guide, know their name and know something about their work. It's kind of rude when you don't use their name, you know, dear illustrator, because you've just sent it out to 20 different illustrators. No, know their name, know their work. Don't go and ask them to illustrate in a style that they've never used before. They're unlikely to do a good job. So really know their work, use their name, and obviously be professional and be polite. Know your project. Have a bit of an idea of what size you'd like it to be. Know how many pages there are going to be. These things are important. Also, is the illustrator going to be just doing the internal illustrations, or would you like them to do the cover design as well? Let them know. And some illustrators are also able to do the graphic design that's responsible for bringing your book to life. So ask if they'll do this and let them know if that's what you would like. Also, have a bit of an idea for how many books you're going to print and where they're going to be sold. Is it just in Australia or is it overseas? These things are important when it comes to developing the contract and the license for those illustrations. If you need any help on this, your local Writers Centre will be able to help you. There's also plenty of information online. And don't be afraid to ask the illustrator for a bit of a guide. Professional illustrators know what they're talking about and they'll be able to help you with this. So if it's all going well so far, let the illustrator have a look at your manuscript. It's really important that the illustrator connects with the story. If they don't, they're not going to do a great job at bringing it to life. But if it's something that really resonates with them and they love the story and they're excited about it, they'll create a much better final product for you. Have a budget in mind and make sure it's fair. You can ask the illustrator for a quote, but sometimes it's good to let them know if you already have a budget that you need to work to. Allow a reasonable amount of time for the illustrator to bring the story to life, and also allow them the free rein to be able to add to the story and enhance the story. By all means, you can provide illustrator notes. So particularly when it's something like, you know, Daisy, the main character, is actually a bear, not a human. That's kind of an important thing for the illustrator to know. But otherwise, let the illustrator bring their own things to the story. You never know what they might come up with, and together you might create a far better end product. If there's anything you don't like, these changes can be made as you go through the revisions in the early stage of the illustration process. So if both parties are happy to proceed, then you guys can organise a contract which includes the license for the illustrations and get it signed. If you're unsure about contracts, your illustrator might be able to guide you, but you can also get plenty of information again online and from your local writers' centres, and also from illustration bodies like Illustrators Australia. Okay, so the illustration begins. Here comes the exciting part. Now, the illustration process is sometimes slightly different for each illustrator, but there is a general process that we all follow. It usually starts with having a look at character design. So we might send you some sketches of the characters that we have in mind when we read your story, and we can agree together what those characters are going to look at like. Now that can come at the start or it can come a little bit later. The first step in the process is storyboarding. So this means creating little tiny thumbnail images of what the entire story is going to be like. So little tiny pages, and usually, as I said, they're thumbnail images, so they're quite small. Now at this stage, the illustrator is going to spend a fair bit of time on this. I know it sounds like something that might not be so important, but those little tiny thumbnail images are very crucial. It's at this stage when you're making decisions about the pace of the story, about giving, for example, the reader a bit of a break in between pages. Perhaps one page is really busy, and then as a break and a contrast, the next page is not so busy, just has one or two elements on it. It's also about considering how we're going to get those page turns to happen. And it's also about considering composition. There's a lot that goes into storyboarding. I'm still learning it all. Once they have completed the storyboard, they're going to submit it to the author. And the author can have a look, and if there's something that they don't quite like, they can send it back to the illustrator with some notes for revisions. There's usually around 2 revisions allowed at this stage, just depending on what the illustrator and the author have agreed on in the contract. The next stage is what we call the roughs. So the illustrator will create some life-size roughs, so whatever size book you've decided on, they will create some rough sketches at that size. Now, some illustrators will do those digitally, others will do them using traditional media and then scan them in and send them to you. It just depends on the illustrator. So again, at this stage, we're trying to get those composition, we're trying to get those final details. We're also trying to make sure that we've left enough room for text and that it's all going to flow quite nicely. These will be sent to the author again, and the author can make any suggested changes. At this stage, there is usually just one revision allowed. Now we're up to the exciting part. So that's the final art. So taking on everything that's been developed so far, the illustrator will then head off and create final art. Now again, that's going to be either using traditional media or using digital media. It just depends on the illustrator. Sometimes it's a mix of both. So they will head off and they will create those final images. Usually they are shown then to the author at the end as one big package of illustrations. It's really hard at this stage, particularly if you're working in traditional media, to make any changes to the final art. So that's why it's very important that all those changes have been agreed upon before in the stages prior to this. So usually at the final art stage, there are no revisions. And then that's it, we're ready to go. Now from here, you might even want to ask your illustrator to create some promotional items such as posters or postcards or bookmarks or something that you might even use at the launch. Maybe something that will go on the web, such as a Facebook event's cover photo. If you want to ask the illustrator to do these extra things, also be prepared to pay them for it. The other thing that an illustrator sometimes can do, so again you might want to ask, is to create a little promotional video. So that's what we call a book trailer. Just a short video that's going to let everyone know about this story that's about to be launched, what's it about. It creates a little bit of excitement. So some illustrators are also able to create this, and you might want to ask your illustrator if they can. And again, if they can and they are willing to, please also consider that you will pay them fairly for this. So that's it from me for this week. Just a quick video about how to hire an illustrator and when to hire an illustrator. I hope that's been of some use. Yeah, I hope this has helped you a little bit and sort of given you a bit of an insight into how the process works. If you like this video, then please do like and subscribe, and I will try and keep this content coming every week. See you later. Have a great week.